Hey gang, welcome to Mzansi and USA News. Today we are going to be focusing on the Economic Freedom Fighters Manifesto. Now, their manifesto is the longest I have come across. It's got 260 pages. Obviously, I'm not going to do all 260 pages. I'm going to try and do as much of it as it is practicable. Now, we're going to start with land. The EFF obviously has got dreams of becoming a ruling party in this country, and where it comes to land, this is what they say over there. Now, of course, you can read that for yourself. I'll just simply highlight the areas that I deem to be important. The EFF government approach to the resolution of the land question will continue to be anchored on the principle of expropriation of land without compensation for equal redistribution and use, and for the state to be the custodian of all land in South Africa. Can you see that? Now, two things immediately I'm drawn to them is the fact that firstly, the land, all land will belong to the state after it's been expropriated. The first thing is the expropriation. The second one is that all land will belong to the state. This obviously will result in a civil war for sure, without a doubt. Because the people from whom the land will be expropriated without compensation would not sit and fold their arms. We saw this happening in Zimbabwe with farms invasions and all that. The EFF obviously wants to take us there, and we obviously need to reject that with the contempt that it deserves. War is brutal, good people, and that's not cowardice. War is brutal. Remember, South Africa was not won on the battlegrounds. South Africa is a negotiated settlement where those who were in power, who had the strongest army in Africa, amongst the best in the world, multiple nuclear weapons, decided not to use any of that, instead decided to cede power through negotiations and through a referendum which was held in South Africa on the 17th of March, 1992. You'll remember that. You'll remember that it was the same President de Klerk who held that referendum, who had few years before that ran on a campaign of releasing the political prisoners, which included Nelson Mandela and the rest of the political prisoners. And he kept those promises. He did this running in 1988. In 1989, he delivered on the promise by releasing Walter Sisulu, Govan Beg, Raymond Hlaba, Ahmed Katrada, and few others. And then in 1990, he released the big fish, which was Kholi Hlahla. We all know what has happened here. And then he crisscrossed this country, asking white people, who were the only ones who were allowed to vote, to come to a referendum to vote yes or no, whether or not should black people be allowed to vote. That's how we attained our freedom. Let no one deceive you. Hence, I'm saying to you, to then go the route that EFF wants to go is troublesome. And here is the other thing. Let them not deceive you into believing that the ANC has sold out on this position, because in 1953, the ANC adopted the Freedom Charter as one of its policies, and the Freedom Charter is very clear. The land belongs to all those who live on it, black and white. Very, very important. So this is a PAC position that the EFF is holding, and that is if you remember, the PAC was a breakaway party from the ANC, one of the first breakaways from the ANC in 1955. I hope you remember that. Well, they didn't do so well in our democracy. Why? Because South Africans were not ready, were not willing to go to war with people who offered them an olive branch. You get the point? Now, I'm not quite sure what would have changed over so many years. I guess now a youth group that knows nothing about what really has happened in our country, being misled by a firebrand in Julius Malema, who obviously is a race hustler that has a lot to benefit by selling them propaganda, and was earning money whilst doing it. That's a correct way of putting it. So hence the youth is at limbo, and they are following him. They do not know what's the right way. Well, let's go through this manifesto and see if we will be able to finish it within a record time. And the record time, I think, will be within an hour, because this is quite long. Nevertheless, so I'm simply saying right out of the gate, out of the outset, from the blocks, if we were running, right from the outset, the EFF is making a statement that will send South Africa down a path that no South African wants to go to. That is a war. And I want to repeat, for emphasis, a war is brutal. Things explode in the war. Bullets are flying all over. Women and children die in the war. And the elderly, no protection. Okay? Very, very important for you. If you want a good example, go and check what World War II was like, or go and check what is happening between Ukraine and Russia right now. You get a clue very quickly. And in South Africa, black people are not as armed as white people are. And there is no reason for this discrimination, or rather this segregation. This segregation is meant by people who seek to rule us, to divide us in order to rule us. That has been the doing of the ruling party since Jacob Zuma became a president. They've done that to the point that they've trained some young people, including Julius Malema, in their hatred for white people. But obviously, as South Africans, we need to circumcise and get rid of this vermin amongst us. Nevertheless, let's proceed. So the EFF government will reintroduce the motion to amend the constitution to permit expropriation of land withoot compensation. That's there in front of you. It's bullet number 2 that I'm reading right now. Well, they need a 2/3 majority to be able to achieve that. The EFF government will amend Section 25 of the Constitution to read as follows. Well, until they have a 2/3 majority, I don't have to read what they will amend it to read as. You get the point. Right now, they don't have a 2/3 majority, and they're not going to get it in the upcoming elections, regardless of what they believe. You don't get votes based on your belief system. You get votes because of the people that went out to vote. And I'm banking on the fact that many South Africans are not simpletons. They can see right through this, even though some of them have allowed their children to be propagandized by the EFF. But then the EFF tells us something, that property, if you look at the second bullet there, it says the state. Okay, I said I wouldn't read that, as a matter of fact. I said I wouldn't read that, so I'll just scroll down a little bit to start reading here on bullet for the purposes of this section. You see that where it says for the purpose of this section, the EFF. Oh no, but that's exactly what I said I wouldn't read, that whole portion. So let's go to where it reads, the EFF government will introduce a legislation. That's paragraph 4 right over here. You can read that for yourself if you are interested. Remember, I'm saying to you the reason I'm not reading it. They need a 2/3 majority for me to read that. Okay? That's a pipe dream, basically. That's what I'm saying to you. The EFF government will introduce a legislation either through an amended constitution or within the context of the current constitution to make state the custodian of all South African land. Good people, that is nothing but modern day slavery. The EFF is telling you you will own nothing and be happy about it. What does that sound like? Doesn't that sound like Klaus Schwab's in the book that he wrote during the COVID? You will own nothing and be happy about it. You remember that? That's basically what they're telling you. They are saying they are going to make state a custodian of all South African land. The EFF government will introduce restrictions for foreign land ownership, land use rights, targeting specifically the hoarding of land by multinationals and billionaires. Well, for me, that point is moot if you consider the previously read point. Because if the government owns all the land, there's no reason for them to make that statement. So if you consider the previous point, this bullet does not make sense to me. Okay? Then they say the EFF government will introduce limitations in terms of the size of land individuals can own or have rights to. This will be determined by a solid study of ecological limits of the various districts in the country. As I've already said, this is nothing but slavery. I do not subscribe to slavery. I love my freedom. I fought for it. The EFF government will fast-track the distribution of land through the land distribution program and transfer 50% of the land to black people within the first 5 years in government. They are lying. The ANC had promised 30% by 2004, if my memory serves me well, while they have not achieved even that much. I'm not quite sure how the EFF thinks that they will be able to do that when they get to power. They don't tell us the how, but the force one will not work because they are going to be met with bullets, grenades, landmines, all manner of armament. And make no mistake, white South Africans have the backing of the West. Make no mistake about it. Just go into war with them. You'll soon find out very well that you are on your own. And there's no African country that will be able to defend South Africa if South Africa makes the blunder that the EFF wants to make. Let's proceed. The EFF government will clarify the land administration powers of traditional leadership to limit the contestation between traditional leaders and municipalities municipalities on land use rights. Okay, that's funny because the EFF now is going to clarify to Amakosi the administration powers. Really, it's not condescending. I want to see this one happening. I really want to see the EFF clarifying to the king of the Zulus, or to the many kings that we have in the Eastern Cape or up north, what is their administration powers. That's a joke. It's a serious joke at it. Nevertheless, let's proceed. The EFF government will establish a People's Land Court in each of the provincial divisions of the High Court to have exclusive jurisdiction to handle all land-related disputes. This may actually be a good idea, right? But you obviously need to consider a need for the intervention, because you're saying you are going to establish a People's Land Court in each provincial division of the High Court. The High Court, first and foremost, is set up for a certain criminal activities that are taking place, right? Including labor activities or civil activities. Okay, that being the case, the High Court is in demand. And so you do need to assess the need or the demand for these courts before you establish them, because they're going to cost money, isn't it? And that's going to come from me as a taxpayer. But however, I think this one is a good point. The EFF government will establish a land ombudsman who will have the powers similar to a Chapter 9 institution. But wait a minute. I thought you were establishing a court for that purpose. The court is basically an ombudsperson. Okay, the EFF will establish a land ombudsman who will have powers similar to a Chapter 9 institution, mandated to investigate and make rulings on land disputes between people and the state. Okay, this one now is, perhaps they would need to give me a clarification between the difference. What would be the difference between this ombudsman and the People's Land Court that they sought to, they claimed that they were to establish? Can you see where they said they are going to establish what to call the court? Okay, as I said, there are certain things that I'm not going to read here, because otherwise I'm going to be here for a good few hours, which I have no intentions of doing. EFF will prioritize women and young people in its allocation of land use. My question there is, what happened to men? Do they have no use for land? Why would you only prioritize women? That makes absolutely no sense to me. Because as far as I understand, our dispossession, if we were to focus on it and look into history, which I'm, as a person, I don't necessarily like to live in the past, you would find that it was not women that were dispossessed, it was families that were dispossessed. Hence the argument that the kings and the chiefs were the leaders of the communities, and therefore they would know exactly how to administer those powers within certain geographical locations, even though not all South Africans today can be located amongst such chiefs and kings and so on and so forth. But to specifically mention women at the exclusion of men when it comes to land, for me, is nothing short of mischievous. The EFF will outlaw the strategic partnership arrangement used for the management of land reform sites, as this benefits white farmers more than resettled black communities. So basically, the EFF will act like a religious cult, where they just decree something and it ought to be so. What's the basis of this claim? Where is the evidence of this claim that they are making here? They then go further to say the EFF government will provide pre-settlement planning and post-settlement support to each person or community allocated land use rights to ensure that the land allocated is fully utilized for its intended purpose. But where is the money going to come from? Do you even care whether South Africans agree or disagree with this proposition of land use versus land ownership? The EFF will introduce land development grants through the land bank, targeting specifically emerging black farmers that's a good thing. It happened in Transkei as well as Siskai said in Matanzim, and I believe Mangope did that as well as the government of apartheid to capacitate the Afrikaner man to rise to where he was by giving them the necessary utensils to be able to plow, to farm, and all that. But that does not have to be done at the exclusion of white people as South Africans. That's just my beef with the EFF. But I support that point. It's a very valid point that they're making there. But the question then once again is, where is the money going to come from? Because remember, in South Africa, you have 7.2 million people who pay tax, and you have 61 million people who depend on that tax. That tax, we expect it to go to fix the roads. We expect it to do all the things that government has been established to do, such as to have an army to protect us from foreign terrorists, and to have the police to protect us from domestic terrorists, to have the traffic officials to ensure that there's no traffic accidents on the road, to ensure that our cars are not stolen, and to have law and order, to have the different clinics, hospitals, to have doctors working in those hospitals and clinics. That's what the tax is supposed to be used for, and many other things that I have not mentioned because that's not the intention of the video. Hence, I'm then asking the question, where is this money that the EFF wants to spend going to be coming from? Because you see, it's very important when you do a manifesto like this to also allocate the cost, because everything costs. There's no free lunch. Everything costs money. So you are going to see why I'm saying this as we go down in their manifesto, okay? Now, I've made notes for myself. Therefore, that means I may not be scrolling up and down on what is on your screen, because I'm not necessarily reading what's on your screen as it is written. I'm reading the notes that I've made based on what is appearing on your screen. Okay, let's proceed. So they say the EFF government will introduce land development grants through Land Bank. Okay, that's what I was reading. The EFF government will offer tax rebates to private companies investing in development of land for the benefit of emerging black farmers. Now, I want you to think very carefully about this one. I know this one will not work. Why? For the same reason Thabo Mbeki in 2008 complained about white people, white businesses in South Africa who were hoarding their proceeds or profits in their bank accounts instead of investing them into the economy. Why was that the case? In fact, he lamented the same thing in I think about 2 years or so ago, now that he's a chancellor of UNISA. He lamented the same thing, that is Thabo Mbeki. Why is that the case? This will not work. Why would it not work? Because no white person will invest in their segregation unless, of course, they are on what I call crazy tablets. It makes absolutely no sense. Why would you invest in a country that is segregating against you? So you are saying white people must invest on emerging black farmers, but yet you want to expropriate their land without compensation. Make that make sense. That doesn't make sense. This is how you know that, okay, their plan will fail to launch. Why? The moment, if they were to take over South Africa, if they were to win South Africa, we will immediately have a Zimbabwe. How do I know? We will be sanctioned by America, will be sanctioned by the UK. All what you know in terms of your life currently will cease to exist. Why? All foreign companies will disinvest and they will walk out of the country immediately. Thousands, in fact not thousands, millions of people will lose their jobs. McDonald's, KFC, Starbucks, you name it. I'm just mentioning a few, and I have not even started to get into the companies of America. Remember, Ford is a car from America. That some of it is manufactured in South Africa, and its sales are being done in South Africa. So there's a lot that we stand to lose if we follow the EFF route of expropriating land without compensation and taking land without compensation and then giving all the land to government. And then we as citizens are literally now slaves of government, that we rent the land from the government even though we had bought it. That's ridiculous. That doesn't even make sense. Think about it. This also includes black people who own land currently, because they said all the land, not some land, all the land. The EFF government will ensure that South African land is in one unitary entity and will repeal constitutional reforms to do away with the so-called right to self-determination entrenched in Section 235 of the Constitution. Well, prepare for war, folks. Okay? If you vote for the EFF, prepare for war. It's just that simple. I'd leave it at that and go to jobs, which is their next point. Okay, here we are. I must commend them. Whoever worked on this document, I've read the entire document. It's such that I'm not going to repeat it for the purpose of this video. I must commend them. They've done quite a good research. However, they have not engaged with it meaningfully. And you are going to see what I mean. If you have not already seen it, you are going to see as we proceed. The EFF government will ensure the creation of millions of decent jobs between 2024 and 2029. This will happen through building state capacity, state-led protected industrialization, industrial diversification, the protection of infant and existing industries, the transfer of ownership to black people through subsidies, and increase in tariffs, and state-aided marketing and promotion of South African products internally, across the continent, and worldwide, with a focus on key, progressive, and most beneficial trading partners. The following are key commitments on job creation. Now, I can say a lot about what I've just read now, but I choose not to because I'm trying to cut the video short. It's up to you to decide whether this is worth the paper that is written on. This is what I just read. It's up to you to decide whether it is worth the paper that it is written on. Okay? I'm going to allow you to make that decision. Now, let's look at bullet 1. The EFF will establish a state-owned housing and roads companies that will deal with the social housing and roads infrastructure backlog. In the short term to medium term, this will result in nearly 4 million jobs. Now, what are the bases of this number? How was the calculation done? How many people currently work for the Department of Housing in South Africa? Has that been factored in? That we already have a Department of Roads in South Africa. We already have a Department of Housing in South Africa. And so what are the bases of this 4 million? Which two companies in South Africa employs 4 million people in the current private sector that we have exist? Standard Bank and Nedbank, which are some of the two largest banks in the top 4 banks, which are in the top 4 banks which we have in South Africa. Between the two of them, as a matter of fact, the first 4 banks in South Africa, Standard Bank, ABSA, FNB, Nedbank, those banks do not, all together combined, they don't employ 1 million people. How is 2 companies established, state-owned companies established by EFF, going to create 4 million jobs? Eskom does not employ 4 million people. And Eskom is one of the biggest companies, state-owned entities which we have. It doesn't employ that many people. SAA does not employ that many people. And by the way, you can fact check me on these. So even if you take the current state capacity, you look at state-owned entities, you say, okay, Eskom is a state-owned entity, PRASA is a state-owned entity, SAA is a state-owned entity. You calculate between these state-owned entities and you say how many people are employed amongst them, you still won't get to 4 million jobs. But the EFF is telling us here that they will establish 2 state-owned entities that are predicated on already existing departments like Department of Roads and Transport and like Department of Housing, with all its resources at this very present moment. They are saying they will add on that and they'll create 4 million jobs. They'll create these 2 companies that will deal with social housing on roads infrastructure backlog, and these will create 4 million jobs. How was that calculated? For me, that's just nothing but electioneering. And you need to be very careful of things like this, because this is how many people have been deceived for 30 years by the African National Congress. The African National Congress will come with English like this, and people will just go and vote. It ought not to be. You ought to check people out. You ought to say, okay, does this even make sense mathematically? What cost accounting was utilized to come to 4 million jobs? Are these permanent jobs? Are they even sustainable? What will these 4 million people be doing? 4 million is a lot of people. As a matter of fact, to prove to you that 4 million is a lot of people, since Zuma took over in 2008 from Thabo Mbeki, until now with Ramaphosa, they have failed to create 2.5 million jobs in 15 years. The EFF is saying that they would have done that in a space of less than 5 years, from 2024 to 2029. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. That's nothing but electioneering. The EFF will establish a state-owned security company that will insource all security personnel working in government facilities. This will immediately create 1.2 million sustainable and quality jobs without departing from the existing government budget expenditure. Make this make sense for me, because currently all government departments have security companies that are working for them. Now, I don't like my videos to be personal, so I don't necessarily like to use myself as a point of reference. I like to focus on the facts. So make this make sense. All government departments currently have security. Some of them are outsourced, some of them are insourced already. So make this make sense. What was the calculation that came to the conclusion that 1.2 million are required? Are you talking about the current guys that are there already, who are already employed? Then that's not job creation. Because whether those guys are employed by government or they are employed by private sector, they are employed. So to simply absorbing them in government, you are absorbing people who already have jobs. You are not creating new jobs. That doesn't make sense. Make that make sense for me. The EFF does not seem to appreciate the role of government, in my view, and the fact that government has absolutely no money if they do not tax you and I. This is a first premise of all reasonable thinking individuals. Government has no money. For government to talk about budget, government's budget should be zero based budgeting. Why? They have no money. They have to tax you and I. I'll talk about the NHI in a separate video. I deliberately have not spoken about it because I think it's just a ploy meant to deceive many, okay? But it's no different from what I'm reading here in this manifesto. This manifesto is nothing but a ploy. Some of the things, there are very good things in this manifesto, make no mistake about it. But many of them are just points that are simply meant to deceive you. Like what I've just read now, the EFF and the state-owned security company. The state is not in a business of security. They have the police and the army for that, for the domestic and foreign terrorists. We don't need more than that. You can leave that to the private sector. Why? Because anything that the state must pay, they have to get that money from the citizens. And as I've already indicated, we only have 7.2 million of us who are paying tax. Let's proceed. And this includes the companies. When I'm saying us, I'm talking about individuals as well as companies. Let's proceed. The EFF will establish a state-owned cleaning, horticulture. Now, horticulture simply means gardening, and landscaping company that will provide these services to state and public facilities and will lead to over 1 million sustainable jobs. I mean, how was this figure calculated? Let alone the fact that that's not government's job to do that. Okay? It's not government's job. Even the private sector, for crying out loud, is outsourcing to other private sector businesses to create employment, this type of work. So why would the EFF want the taxpayer to have this as a burden of what the tax money is used for? Maybe I should, after I've done with all the manifestos, make a video of the purpose of a government, because it seems to me that that's not understood here. Okay? I don't think they really understand why governments exist. Now, they say here, the EFF government will declare multiple special economic zones in various regions in South Africa, clearly emphasizing that each investor will gain special economic zone benefits such as tax incentives and factory building allowances if they each employ and sustain a minimum of 2,000 jobs per factory. Well, this sounds like a bad economic theory to me. Okay? And yes, I have studied economics. So this sounds like a very bad economic theory to me. The EFF government will ensure a minimum of 80% of the goods and services procured by the state at all levels and at all state companies are domestically produced. That is very admirable, only if it could be achieved. We live in a global system where there is tremendous competitive edge, and no country is an island. So if, for an example, you consider right now, we have Ford in South Africa. That's not a South African brand, but it employs a lot of people in South Africa. In fact, if you look at the entire motor industry, it employs 500,000 of South Africans in its entirety, and that is directly and indirectly. It employs about 390,000 directly, which is about 400,000 jobs, and about 110,000 indirectly through the parts and all that. That gives you about 500,000. All the motor industry which we have in South Africa, whether it be Ford, VW, you bring them all together, they make about 6% of our GDP. Okay, so if you consider that these companies are not South African, and you are coming up with this, you are saying the EFF government will ensure a minimum of 80% of the goods and services procured by the state at all levels, at all state companies are domestically produced, right? Those companies that have invested in South Africa, they don't invest with certain clauses in their contracts that there should be something that they get back in their own countries. It could be in the textile industry. I'm just making an example. Business is about negotiations in a free market economy. I just want you to bear that in mind. This part of the policy, or rather manifesto, is admirable only if it could be implemented. Okay? This one is very admirable only if it could be implemented. And I'm just simply pointing out to you what could be the reasons why it would not be implementable. That we are not doing business by ourselves. Okay? We are not self-sufficient. We're not doing business by ourselves and trading with ourselves in every sphere. If we were self-sufficient, we have every mineral required for our life, clothing, and everything like that, then it may be understood. Okay? But we are not an island. We're not living in an island where all other countries have nothing to say about what we do. We buy products from overseas. We expect them to buy our products. How can we expect them to buy our products, but we don't want to buy their products? And that's where now the decrease of the 80% will come in. The EFF government will ensure a minimum of 50% of all South African mineral resources are locally beneficiated. Again, it says processed and value added to create millions of jobs and create new cities. Well, they need to explain the how of that. You can't just throw that out there. Again, that is to be admired if indeed they would be able to do it. But there is no African country that has been able to beneficiate any of its raw materials. Okay? So this would be the first. There's no African country that has been able to beneficiate any of its materials where it was able to make semi-finished or finished products out of its raw materials and then sold them at profit to all these other foreign countries. Okay? So there's a lot of investment here that is required, even in the assets to extract the minerals, to turn them from raw materials into semi-finished or into finished products. So once again, I'm going to ask a question: where is that money going to come from? This is very, very, very important. Then they say the EFF government will ensure that all food for local consumption is produced and processed on massive scale in South Africa. This will happen through the intensification of small-scale farming and agriculture, and by giving strategic support to small-scale agricultural operations, including providing trade routes. All food traders in South Africa will be compelled by law to buy South African food products and to support operations that produce these food products. Now, this is called tyranny. This is called dictatorship. Okay? So those of you who are excited about voting for the EFF is telling you in its manifesto its intentions concerning your life. Your life will be altered. One thing for sure, guaranteed. It will be altered like nobody's business. You will not live the life that we have led and our parents have led under apartheid, and those of us who grew up under apartheid and are now adults having our own children and have led a good life up until now, all things being equal, if you leave all the nonsense that the African National Congress has done to the economy. Now let's move on. The EFF will build sustainable. That's now number 8. They will build sustainable zones that will supply food items to other parts of the world. Aha, there we go. Particularly the rest of Africa, China, Latin America, and India. But wait a minute. If you are having that 80% up there that I spoke about, you cannot get this right, because this is a consequence of negotiation. Why would these countries accept that we will be their producer, we will be their producer of choice for food when we don't want to buy anything from them? 80% of what we produce should be coming from South Africa. Are you following what I hope you are, because it's a reasonable argument to make. It's like if you go into business, you're going to buy something from somebody, raw materials from this particular individual. There are bilaterals amongst countries. And so countries negotiate. Okay, you have maize, I have this. You have coffee, I have that. Okay, what price can I get for that, seeing that I'll be sending my maize to you at a cheaper rate at this and this and this and this to sustain your population? Oh no, as a matter of fact, we don't need maize because of we have farmers in our country who produce this and this and this and this. Okay, but remember, I also have farmers in my country who produce coffee. Therefore, I don't necessarily need to buy your coffee then, if that is the case. You get the point. So it becomes an issue of negotiation between the president, who is going to sign the contract, and then allow the business people to come in and refine the finer details required to do trade between countries. Okay, but this requires leadership. This not dictatorship. No, that is why, for example, Donald Trump in America had a very good relationship with Xi Jinping, had a very good relationship with Putin. There were no wars when Trump was a president. It doesn't matter what you think about him. And the world was prospering when Trump was a president. It doesn't matter what you think about him. There was peace everywhere, because he, as a leader, is a very good negotiator. That's why he had a good relationship with these individuals, and they got on along. You could see genuinely when they met that they respected each other. Very, very important. That's what you need from leadership, not dictatorship. The EFF will help communities in the coastal areas to start agro-fishing corporates and businesses, which will be their main source of income and livelihood. Once again, this would be great if this could be pulled off. The problem with it is, where is the funding going to come from? Are you following my point? Because as a taxpayer, South Africa has no money. Right now, they're trying to implement NHI. As I said, it's a separate video. I don't want to spoil the video of EFF's manifesto with NHI. But it's a matter of cost factor as well, because the EFF itself subscribes to NHI. Yes, not in its current form. They said, they made that very clear, but they do subscribe to NHI. Okay? Nevertheless, the EFF government will ensure development, protection, and localization industries which will produce basic daily use goods through import substitution mechanisms. Now, what is import substitution mechanism? It simply means you promote domestically produced goods to replace whatever imports you may have been intending. Instead of therefore importing that product, you produce it domestically. Again, if that could be pulled off, it's a brilliant idea. No doubt in my mind about it. That's a brilliant idea. But the question is it doable, considering South Africa has had Buy South Africa? There was a reason that did not go off well, because South Africa is not living in an island. Very, very important. Digest this point, because it's a very important point to ponder upon when you're making a foreign policy. Your foreign policy should be informed by the situation and the scenarios that are prevailing around you. You can't boss other people around. Let's proceed. The EFF, that is other countries. The EFF government will ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises are given strategic support, and that legislation is passed to ensure that key industrial inputs and service to big corporate companies are provided by SMMEs. Well, for me, this is nothing but tampering with the free market economy. Okay? But wait a minute. We would be in a communist state in any case if the EFF were to take over. So I guess my point is pointless there to say they are tampering with the free market economy, but I'm a free market economist. So that's very, very important for you to know. The EFF government will protect the right of street hawkers and informal traders to trade in a safe and clean environment in all cities and towns of South Africa without fear of the police harassment. Great idea if it could be achieved. But these individuals must, after they have received this type of protection, they need to be regularized so that they could pay tax. This is very, very important. We need that tax. The EFF government will prohibit the confiscation of street traders' goods as means of enforcing municipal bylaws. Well, at some point in time, lawbreakers will have to be prosecuted. Laws are there to be obeyed and not to be broken. Okay? But hey, what do I know? I'm not a communist. Let's proceed. The EFF government will build markets and storage facilities for street hawkers and small vendors in trading areas. Once again, this is a serious joke. EFF seems to believe the role of government is to be a Father Christmas. Where is the money going to come from? Good people, when you look at your salary, you look at the line item that says pay as you earn. How do you feel on the inside? Excited? If any of you feel excited after you've seen the pay as you earn, if you are running a business, look at the tax item. You say gross profit before tax, and then you calculate your, or rather you say not gross profit, profit before tax. Then you say, you put in your 28%, the tax rate, and you look at the rent value of that 28%. Tell me how you feel as a business person. Do you feel excited about it? Of course, nobody feels excited about that. Okay? And that being the case, we need to tread carefully and not behave as though government is entitled to our money. Because this, for me, is an issue that should be negotiated on an ongoing basis. Because South Africans' taxes are too high, for crying out loud, for a developing country. They are already far too high. Pay as you earn in other countries is much less than what, and I'm talking about a first world country, much less than what we are paying in South Africa. So this is important. Nevertheless, let us proceed. So then they say, what they will be doing then is to protect. They say the EFF government will ensure development, protection, and localization of industries to produce. Then they gave us a list of items. Can you see there? Here they are. Glasses, cups, all of this list, right? Now, of course, I'm saying this is tampering with the free market economy. Domestically manufactured products can have various costs and thus be more expensive, while at the same time, they could be imported at a cheaper price. Okay? Now, I understand some people will argue that if we import, like China, for example, will do what is called dumping in economics, and they bring a lot of products in our country that are far too cheap that South Africans cannot compete because of many other costs, or rather overheads, ingredients or overhead costs. That's the word I'm looking for, overhead costs. Well, then it makes it almost impossible for South Africa's textile industry to compete with China. Therefore, they get out of business and people lose jobs and all that. I understand that protection. If that's what they are talking about, then that's fine. In fact, they do in H mention the textile industry, including clothing and shoes. So that's a good idea. The EFF government will ensure that small, medium enterprises are given strategic support. Okay, that's the one that I read, and I said this is just tampering with free market economy. The EFF government will protect the right of street hawkers. I read that, and I said these people need to be regularized, and they need to pay tax. The EFF government will amend the Public Management Act and Municipal Finance Act to compel national, provincial, and state-owned entities to procure 80% of all goods from local and a minimum 50% from producers, of which 50% is owned and controlled by women. Well, I don't necessarily have a problem with the idea. It's a good, the idea that they have here is a good idea, save this. This is a violation of the current constitution. Thank goodness the EFF will have 2/3 majority to pass this many communist agenda designed to destroy our country. Because you are saying 50% and then of this from producers, of which is owned and controlled by women and youth. So what about all the men? So they should be impoverished. Remember, our constitution currently says in black and white, you will not discriminate against anybody. Paragraph 9, subparagraph 3. You will not discriminate against anybody based on their sex or gender. They even go as far as sexual orientation, amongst other things. And they mention age there as well in the same paragraph. And the EFF is telling us here that this PFMA amendment will only be done to suggest that 80% of these should be purchased from women. Okay, they saying, let me read that again. They say provincial and state-owned entities to procure 80% of all goods from local produce and a minimum of 50% from producers, of which 50% is owned and controlled by women and youth. Why? Why? That makes absolutely no sense, except, of course, we are in a communist utopia. That makes absolutely no sense. Okay? We shouldn't be allowing this as South Africans to be divided based on our gender or race or ethnicity. Okay? We shouldn't be allowing it, because it's a very, very dangerous place. These identity politics that the EFF is playing, and now the new kid on the block, they are playing, these are very dangerous politics. Let's proceed. The EFF government will build and support state-owned trading and retail platforms in every municipality. Well, they better do, because you understand that if we get into this communist utopia, your American products will cease to exist, because there will be disinvestment in this country if EFF were hypothetically to win elections. We know they're not going to win any elections, but if they were to hypothetically win elections, we will have a lot of disinvestment. Therefore, they literally will need this particular step to win. The EFF will build and support state-owned trading and retail platforms. They certainly will need them for every municipality. Why? Because the current platforms that your retail businesses, your food businesses will be gone. They will disinvest. Nevertheless, is that negative speech? No, that's being realistic. We've seen it happening in Zimbabwe. We should never think that we are immune to it. The EFF government will declare the following areas special economic zones with zero company taxes and building allowances in exchange for each investor creating 2,000 full-time jobs, paying a minimum wage and pension contributions. Okay, remember, this will be a communist state. So now I'm going to jump all of that, because they say they will do this right throughout the country. You can see that this is nothing but electioneering. None of this will actually come true. So here they say the EFF government, in paragraph 23, the EFF government will introduce 3-shift system, morning, afternoon, and night, to allow the economy to operate 24 hours, ensure continuous productivity without overworking individual workers, and create millions of jobs. So people will work short time, and they're saying that they are creating millions of jobs. That's interesting, because if in 24 hours, that then means if in 24 hours you've got 3 shifts, then for business to be open, how many employers are going to fall in love with that, paying 3 salaries over 24 hours? I mean, think about it. Nevertheless, let's continue. So they're saying the EFF government will use state procurement as an instrument for driving job creation, meaning at a minimum of 80% of all goods services procured by the state must be locally produced and majority owned and controlled by the people of South Africa. The localization drive will include procurement inclusive of automobiles, electronics, textiles, food, and professional services. That would be very interesting, because if you're talking about automobiles, there is not one single automobile made in South Africa that is a South African product. So that's a very, very interesting theory. The EFF government will pass a policy that 100% of the food procured by the state for school feeding schemes, hospitals, prisons, etc. is locally produced by emerging, historically excluded farmers, and that a minimum of 50% is procured from women and the youth. What's happening to young men and men in general in the EFF's government? Are they being transitioned? What's happening to them exactly? Nevertheless, ponder upon that. The EFF government will put measures in place to ensure a minimum of 50% of the labor force is unionized and collective bargaining is prescribed and actively promoted. I have absolutely nothing to say. I have no respect or regard for unions. It's a communist ideology. They are completely useless as far as I'm concerned. employees suffer a lot of occupational detriment and labor abuse at work, and the unions are there just smiling and having a lovey-dovey relationship with the employer. So I have no regard for unions, none whatsoever. Let's proceed. The EFF government will ensure that a minimum of 50% of all state procurement benefits women and youth-owned controlled companies. I'm going to ask again, what about young men and men in general? The EFF government will guarantee 1 degree, 1 job. Can you guys see that? Can you see that? They will guarantee 1 degree, 1 job. That's 29. Paragraph 29. How? The EFF government commits to absorb all unemployed graduates and place them into areas relevant to their qualifications. Really? What about those who studied gender studies? Where are they going to work? There's quite a lot of useless degrees that are being produced by these universities because their programs are not directly linked to the market. And we've been lamenting this for years. So people are being degreed more than a thermometer, and then when they graduate, they get to be useless. Not the people, but the qualification. Nevertheless, how and where is the finances going to come from? South Africa, as I've already indicated, has only 7.2 million taxpayers who are already heavily burdened by all manner of taxes, from VAT to fuel levy to pay as you earn. The EFF government commits to absorb all unemployment. Well, I read that. But how are they going to do it? With which money? The EFF government will ensure that each individual with a university degree or diploma receives a minimum stipend of 5,000. Guys, this is a joke. Why? According to the last calculation, 15 million South Africans are out of work. 15 million. They are out of work. So if that is true, then multiply that by 5,000. That's ridiculous. Where is that money going to come from? And this on a monthly basis. Where is government going to get that from? Remember, as I said, government does not have money. It's not like they are VW that produces a vehicle and sell it. So VW's money depends on their sales. So the more sales they make, the more money, the more their bottom line is fattening. Can you see that? So government, however, on the other side, their income or revenue is based on the tax base. And the tax base does not increase if you are keeping people unemployed and giving them 5,000 stipends. Instead, you are increasing the burden on those who are already heavily burdened. I hope that makes sense to you. Let's proceed. The EFF government will drive a massive job creation program by building studios in every municipality for artists to record and produce their work locally. Is this not a private sector endeavor? As far as I'm concerned, this is nothing but an EFF electioneering campaign to win elections. There's no way they're going to do something like this. Where is the money going to come from? The EFF government will create jobs through local beneficiation. Okay, I read something like that already. So let's get on EFF on education. We'll jump the energy. Otherwise, as I said, we'll never finish. Let's get on EFF in education. Okay, so the EFF will introduce free decolonized education for all, incorporating topics pertaining to indigenous knowledge, sovereignty, and economic freedom in the curricula. You see that? The EFF government will ensure that all schools have access to adequate sanitation and that pit latrines are completely eradicated and replaced with safe and adequate flushing toilets. That's the third point. I skipped a point there. The EFF government will criminalize all parents who do not take their children to school. You know what? we can expect nothing less from a communist state. Why? As far as they are concerned, our children don't belong to us, they belong to the government. Can you see that? So one, they are going to give free education. That's a lie. Nothing is free. The so-called free education, NAFSAS, or what do you call it? Is it called NAFSAS? Yeah, it's called NAFSAS. NAFSAS is nothing but our tax money. Very, very important to tell the children the truth, which they are stealing instead of giving to the children for bursaries and all that. Remember, I said if I finish this within an hour, that will be a record time. I'm nowhere near finishing, and I'm going to continue until I'm done. The EFF government will ensure that all schools have access to adequate sanitation. Okay, I read that. These are desirable, obviously. The fourth bullet, let me read it out. I agree with them 100%. The EFF government will ensure that all schools have access to adequate sanitation and that pit latrines are completely eradicated and replaced with safe and adequate flushing. There is a need for that, and I agree with them, and that's doable. The EFF government will eradicate all school structures built from inappropriate materials such as mud and asbestos, and I agree with that as well. Whether that's doable within the current midterm budget, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they've considered that. Remember, South Africa has got about 24,900 schools. I don't know how many of those schools are made of mud, and the EFF is not telling us that. 24,900 schools. How many of those schools are made out of mud and are made out of all of these things, these materials that are not desirable, and asbestos? Okay, let's look at early childhood. The EFF government will make universal provision for early childhood development programs and will make it compulsory for children the ages of 3 years and upwards to be enrolled in an early childhood development for free. Now, this is nothing but a communist ploy to program your children and to propagandize them as early as possible. That's why they want them when they are 3, so that they can be subservient to the state and march. If you read 1984, you get a good understanding of what I'm talking about. Communists are very good at this. They want to steal your children from you because when they send them to school, that's where they teach them their propaganda. Hence, they want them as early as 3 years old. Surely you don't think that this is for the good of the child. If you do, think again. The EFF will develop a common ECD curriculum focusing on nutrition programs, book reading, and storytelling. Did you hear that? They are the ones who will develop these programs. Okay? So they are the ones who will be telling these stories. Very interesting. Of course, the teachers will be telling it, but they would have developed this curriculum. And other land-based activities to enhance children's understanding of their surrounding environment. Under the EFF government, all early child development practitioners will be employed on a full-time basis with full pay and pension contributions by government. Come on, who is going to be paying for this? So that means under the EFF government, we will be taxed at 100%. That's basically what this means. The EFF government will train additional 40,000 early child development practitioners by 2027, with a minimum of 50% being women and youth. Okay. This is another communist pipe dream that would not be achieved without mass exodus of business and educated middle class to countries that recognize that the state has no children. The state, as a matter of fact, is sterile and therefore should not tell those of us who are not how to raise our children. This is very, very important. Just out of interest, how much will the citizens of this EFF-led country be taxed? How much? Think about it. I've just said 100%. That's what I think. Let's look at basic education. The EFF government will increase the use of information communication technology for teaching with the aim of achieving universal coverage in computer literacy by 2026. Did you hear that? They will increase the use and communication of technology for teaching. Please pay attention to that. Listen to this. Under the EFF, each learner will receive a tablet loaded with all the necessary study material, tutorials, and educational videos. Did you hear that? Okay, having listened to that, listen to this. The EFF government will prioritize indigenous ways of teaching, learning and development. One education system, one country. Please make the first two bullets reconcile to this one that I've just read now. Square the circle. Under the EFF government, all students will fall under one school system and all matric learners will write the same examination. The Independent Examination Board, IEB, will be abolished. But why? Where is the result of the referendum wherein parents agreed to such a proposition? Can you see that we have a little Hitler here in the making, a little dictator? That's what I mean by Hitler. A little dictator here in Julius Malema in the making. The EFF will provide scholar transport for learners who stay more than 2 kilometers from their school and prioritize local taxi associations in the procurement process. I agree with them when it comes to scholar transport. I disagree that they should be utilizing taxis. There's a lot of people who are involved in the scholar transport businesses who do not own taxis. As a matter of fact, it is my view that taxi drivers and taxi owners should be excluded from this process. Why? It's simple. They are not professionals. They are not professionalized. I would not want my children, for example, to ride in a taxi. Okay? I have not ridden in a taxi since I was, 19 years old. Is that how long? Wow, that's a long time ago. Stand to be corrected. Yeah, I think I was 19 at the time. Nevertheless, the point is, once again, coming back to this, I would not want my children to ride in a taxi. Why? Many of our taxi drivers do not drive according to the rules of the road. Many of the taxis are not roadworthy, and these are violent individuals who are extremely rude in their behavior. They lack a moral compass. There's a lot I can go on and on and on and on. They need to be professionalized. They need to be upskilled. They need to know how not to be barbaric and live as decent human beings. Basically, taxi drivers need to be civilized. They are a bunch of uncivilized individuals. They need to be civilized. So I completely disagree with them if they are going to use taxi drivers and give them a priority when it comes to our children and school passing them. The EFF will build hostels where scholar transport is not practical and too costly. Okay, look, the EFF simply thinks that the purpose of the tax is to be a Father Christmas. There's no way that is practicable. Not at all. Not with the PES, unless you increase the tax base by double what we are currently at. And that will require a serious capitalism, not their ideology of expropriating land without compensation, not their ideology of BEE, not their ideology of affirmative action. It will require capitalist policies to change the economy of South Africa, which is exactly what China did 30 years ago. That's why China is where it is today. It's not there because of communist policies. That's a misnomer. It's a lie that communists tell, which is not true. Nevertheless, let's continue. The EFF government will establish specialized autism schools fully equipped with tailored educational resources and trained staff to provide inclusive and supportive learning environments from children with autism. This one, I have absolutely no critique of it. I salute it. It's a very good idea. I think Ndlozi must have come up with this one. It's a very bright idea. So either Ndlozi or Shivambu came up with this one. Brilliant idea. Nevertheless, let's proceed. The EFF government, I suspect, is Ndlozi. The EFF government will electrify all schools everywhere by 2026. You know what the EFF needs to do is to say, in South Africa, there's 24,900 schools. Of the 24,900 schools, so many of them are not electrified. And this is how much it costs to electrify a school. And therefore, we will be able to do this by 2026. They have not done any of that. And therefore, to me, this good idea, but where will the funding be coming from? The EFF government will provide 2 nutritious meals a day to all learners in schools by 2025 and will prioritize local small business and farmers in the area where... Now, if you're going to give children nutritious meals, 2 nutritious meals, I ask again, where will the money come from? During apartheid, we were fed at school, okay? We had a break where we were fed. So they are basically trying to reintroduce what was happening during the apartheid. In summer, we had milk and bread and peanut butter. And then in winter, we had bread together with soup, which was called toppers. I don't know how many of you know it. I'm giving away my age right now. But nevertheless, so that's what they are trying to do. It's a good thing. You don't destroy that which works. You only fix that which is broken. Don't fix that which is not broken. If our government had stopped feeding children at schools, I don't know why they decided to stop it. But then I ask a question again, where's the money going to come from? Because now the people that must be recipients of this have increased in number. Let us proceed. So the EFF, this is a very good idea, by the way. The EFF will provide, will ensure that there is clean water in every school by January 2026. Again, great idea. If money is not chowed, this is possible. Because even with the problem of Umgeni water, Val River, having sewage and all that, a good rainy season gets rid of all of that. So if our guys, our civil engineers, we employ the correct individuals who have the correct skill to repair the pipes required so that there is no spillage in these rivers, the mess in the rivers is going to disappear. Just give it a good rainy season, it will disappear. Of course, there may be people that may be required to come in and clean if we are not in rainy season, because that's water directly utilized for human consumption. So it is doable, though. This is one thing that I think they have put there and is very practicable, and it indeed can be done within the framework of their proposal that they are proposing. The EFF government will provide security and fencing in all schools. Well, this is also doable. However, the communities within which these schools, because all our schools were fenced, but black people have this tendency of running down things, running these fences down and stealing the window panes and all that. So you need to start there. The EFF government will encourage all learners to study mathematics and robotics. Good luck with that one. I agree 100%. But how are you going to convince children whose parents know nothing about mathematics, and who's going to support them? Because, for an example, if you're a parent and you've got children, you know this already, that you do most of the homework for your child. Right now, my children are writing exams at schools, and my spouse is busy, very busy, most of the time trying to help them. Okay? Now, I'm just making an example. Okay? This is very important for you to know. Sometimes it's me who's busy with them, but right now, so what I'm trying to say is the parents who have not done mathematics, how are they going to help that child? Because most of these schools, they introduce them to the concept, and then thereafter the child must be helped as well. So these are the dynamics when talking about mathematics and robotics. Many parents are not oriented in these areas. So that's another hurdle you're going to have to jump. Under the EFF government, all schools will have remedial teachers. Again, where's the money going to come from? The EFF government will build new schools with technology integration in the classroom, sports facilities, and computer labs to reduce the teacher-pupil ratio to 1 to 30 for primary schools and 1 to 25 for secondary schools. Again, that is generic. That doesn't tell us much because, as I've already indicated, there's 24,900 schools. So when you say you're going to build new schools, what are you talking about? How many? Are you going to get rid of the current schools which you have? Or are these so-called new schools going to be renovations? Exactly how is this going to be factored in? The EFF government will ensure that all learning and teaching support materials are delivered in September, the year preceding a new school year, and will publish a report in November of every year and deliver of a learner teacher support material. Great idea if implemented. Great idea. The EFF government will launch a year-long teachers campaign starting in 2024 to look at both professional and personal needs of teachers, including training in soft skills, emotional wellness, financial literacy, assistance with debt management, etc. And train all teachers in cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Okay, they were coming okay up until they got to that one. where teachers are now suddenly going to play a role of paramedics. But I think it's still a good idea, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if all teachers, but to have a teacher or two in the school, perhaps you can even have a ratio. I don't know how they've determined the all, but I don't believe I need to criticize where criticism is not due. The EFF will build a high technology teacher training colleges to equip educators of the future with adequate technological skills to impart to learners. How long does it take to build a college? Considering that 2026 deadline for computer literate learners, how does this make sense? Because you've just said few paragraphs above, you have an intended deadline that must be met of 2026 where all learners should be computer literate. But then now you are saying that teachers need upskilling in this area and there should be technological colleges built to train these teachers there. So it sounds to me you placed a cart before the horse. It's a good idea nevertheless, if you can fund it, because you're going to need the private sector here. You know, all these communist ideologies, you're going to need to check them out at the door. The EFF government will introduce peer review evaluation for teachers that focuses on development. That's basically a 360 review. And I agree with that. The EFF government will launch a return to school campaign in 2025 for all people who have dropped out of school, including domestic workers, sex workers, and girls who have left school. Hebatum. What's wrong with sex work now? Remember, EFF has been going around speaking on behalf of sex workers as though that was something honorable, isn't it? Are sex workers aware of these secret plans to send them back to school? What about domestic workers? Are they aware that the EFF wants them to send them back to school to learn about photosynthesis and math? What about boy children? Should our daughters now marry amakaba? What about the explosion of the GBV that will result because of unlearned boys who will be harassing their learned spouses? You need to think about these things before you put them to paper. Clearly, this one was not given much thought to it. Instead, it's the woke ideology of communist propaganda that has been spreading throughout the world like cancer. The EFF government will employ at least 2 physical education trainers in each school by 2026. 24,900 by 2. That would be 48. 45, 800. Right? Yes. That will be 45, 800. Yeah, I think round about there, if my math is correct. Because they said by 2. Again, where's the money going to come from? Do schools need that? Just on a lighter note, with so much pap that people eat every day in South Africa, that they consume, where will the physical trainers come from? The government will build 2 grass fields, 2 pitches, and a swimming pool at every school by 2026. Come on, man. Julius, this is a lie and you know it. Gee, what? Sure, it's desirable, but now you have a wish list that you've placed here and you call this a manifesto. This is now a wish list. The EFF government will appoint 2 social workers per school by the end of 2025 to provide counseling and career guidance to each school, aiming for this to be achieved by 2025. Where is the money going to come from? You require 48. Sorry. I said 45 earlier on. I was wrong, because 24 by 2, that is 48. That is for 24 by 2, that is 48, right? So that would be 49,800. So you've got 24,900 schools. That would be 49,800. As I said earlier on, I could be wrong arithmetically in terms of how nevertheless, the point I'm trying to make here, are you telling me that there are 48,000 social workers that are not working in South Africa right now who are qualified, that you claim you'll achieve this by 2025? You understand why I'm saying this is a story that is being told that is not true. The EFF government will appoint 1 nurse per school by 2025. Why do schools need nurses? Are there no clinics nearby? Why do they need nurses? And where are you going to get 24,900 nurses? The EFF, and by the way, the 24,900 is just based on the current schools that exist. It's not based on the further ones that they have claimed in this very manifesto that they are going to employ. The EFF government will appoint one orthodontist per school by... No, that's impossible. No. That's impossible. They are going to appoint one orthodontist per school by 2025. Guys, please fact check me on this. An orthodontist studies as a bare minimum 10 years after they matriculated. Okay? You want to tell me that there's 24,900 orthodontists that are sitting somewhere waiting for a job? No, they don't exist. As a matter of fact, if you went to certain hospitals in South Africa, you will observe that they have a dentist, but they don't have an orthodontist. There's a reason for that. So every few hospitals, you may have one orthodontist serving them. And the EFF is saying, and in South Africa, you've got 4,200 public hospitals. Okay? I doubt if in these 4,200 hospitals, you've got 1,000 orthodontists. The EFF is saying you are going to have 24,900 of them, one per school. And these orthodontists are currently, their salary is nothing less than 1.8 million a year. The EFF is saying they are going to pay that much. 1.8 million is an equivalent of a salary of a chief audit executive. And the principals don't earn that much. And this person is going to be stationed at the school. Where is the money going to come from? Because remember, you said that education was going to be free. So out with the window that you can say you are generating revenue from fees, because your schools will now be no fee paying schools. So where's the money going to come from? The EFF government will make compulsory for every school to have a vegetable garden by 2025. Tata Juju. That's possible. The EFF government will employ one arts and culture teacher per grade in each school by 2025. The EFF government will build computer labs equipped with internet connectivity by 2025. Now, some of these are desirable, they are admirable, but we know they are not implementable. Why? You need a budget to build these things. The EFF government will build primary healthcare facility in each school. There you go. That's a joke. The EFF government will build a library in all schools without libraries. Once again, that's doable, but you need to assess and give a practicable timeline. Otherwise, you will be a liar like the African National Congress and not deliver on what you promised to deliver. The EFF government will incorporate career guidance as mandatory subject in the high school curriculum for all high school learners. I thought that was the case. When I went to school, that is exactly the case. Nevertheless, the EFF government will introduce modules about different disabilities and practical lessons on inclusion. The EFF will provide safe, accessible transport for children with disabilities. That one is desirable. The EFF will provide various types of mobility, technology, and human aids for all pupils with disability. At what cost? Now, I'm not saying that shouldn't be provided, but I'm saying how many people require this help per school. Has the EFF done a thorough study of this? Do they have a dipstick that they have performed to come to this conclusion? Is it affordable for the taxman? The EFF government will provide sanitary towels to all learners in public schools immediately. This is amazing. Boys don't need sanitary towels. This is amazing. They say to all learners. The EFF government will introduce indigenous languages as a foundation of education system in all provinces. Now, this is problematic. whilst I support the idea, it's a brilliant idea, but it's an idea that can never ever be realized in the next 20 years. For an example, my mother tongue is Xhosa. There aren't many people who have a PhD in Xhosa. And for you to develop indigenous language as a foundation for education system in all provinces, you don't only need to understand Xhosa, because you must now understand calculus and interpret it in Xhosa, meaning you must be good at calculus for you to interpret it in Xhosa. Can you see that? So you need PhDs in different subjects, but they have also specialized with the language. And then for you to be able to transfer, to translate the textbooks, to write textbooks in that language. Now, of course, you can have a PhD in Xhosa and a PhD in mathematics. One guy writes calculus and then the other guy simply interprets. I understand that. Interpretation does not require expertise in the, but it requires knowledge, because you can't translate English into Xhosa if you don't understand English. That's the point I'm making. Even though you have a PhD in Xhosa, if you don't understand English, your PhD in Xhosa is useless in terms of translating an English written book into Xhosa. Okay, do you understand that? I hope you do. So there's a lot required here. We need PhDs in all these languages. People who are now going to volunteer to go and study Sepedi, study Setswana, for the purposes of being translators, because you're not going to have every Jack and Jill translating. It's not going to make sense. The EFF government, hence I'm saying, it is something that's going to take some time. It's not something that can be done overnight. The EFF will introduce comprehensive adult education programs and guarantee educational access by adults who could not finish school for one reason or the other. The EFF government will ensure that there are sufficient toilets for the number of pupils in every school, in line with the learner to toilet ratio 1:25. The EFF government will ensure that all schools have dedicated science laboratory from which learners will perform experiments by 2026. Once again, that is not true. That's just nothing but electioneering. So the EFF government will ensure that all schools have dedicated science laboratory from which learners can perform their experiments by 2026. I said that's just nothing but electioneering. Laboratories are quite expensive because of the utensils that accompanies them. It's not just a building. It should be a building designed to cater for all the laboratory utensils that you need for your different experiments. The EFF government will ensure that all schools have a gym fitted with sporting equipment so as to promote physical activity and a healthy lifestyle. I'm sure this can only be done by a government who has a huge investment. For example, Virgin Active could take this as an initiative to invest in different schools as their social responsibility, for example, or the other guys that compete, Planet Fitness, and so on and so forth. But because the EFF is anti-private sector and he wants to own everything as a government, that becomes impossible. Therefore, the burden shifts from the private sector to the taxpayer. The EFF government will ensure all schools have a library with free internet access by 2026. The EFF government will offer music lessons in all schools so as to improve the cognitive skills and stimulate all learners. Okay. The EFF government will ensure that all schools have a musical and orchestral equipment by 2025. Wow, that's quite expensive. Guys, I hope you can see this for what it is. This is nothing but electioneering. The EFF government will build more classrooms so as to ease overcrowding. The EFF government will develop personalized strategies which will prevent students from dropping out of school. I mean, really, think about what they are saying here and what this would entail. Okay? This will entail some sort of intelligence of knowing in advance that this student is intending to quit, which supposes you need to know the conditions that exist in that student and that pupil's life that may necessitate them to quit, so as to prevent the materialization of them making that decision. So you need to know their socio-economic conditions at home. You need to know what is occupying their mind, what are the factors that are prevalent in their lives that could lead to them making such a decision. It's a very, very difficult thing because human beings are not readily open with their challenges and problems to begin with, particularly children. Okay? The EFF government will improve the literacy, the numerous levels of learners in all public schools by promoting a culture of learning from grade R. The EFF government will provide additional learner and teacher support materials and training from grade R to grade 12. The EFF government will provide first additional language workbooks to all learners from grade R to grade 12 each year. The EFF government will improve the capacity of educators by creating opportunities for all professional development so as to enhance the teaching skills. Can you see that? So there's a lot more where that came from. The EFF government will make obtaining a learner's driving license compulsory subject for all learners in the further education and training phase, grade 10 to 12, for the learners who have 10 to 16 years of age. That's a brilliant idea. The EFF government will make history a compulsory subject. Well, that's 1984, the book 1984. That's what all communist dictatorships do. They make history compulsory subject because they are the ones who write that history. The EFF government will introduce buddy peer tutoring in schools to take advantage of positive peer pressure influence. Okay, that is just English. The EFF government will introduce smart classrooms which use digital equipment such as laptops, interactive whiteboards, and interactive screens by 2026. Once again, that's going to cost money. Consider that these are no fee-paying schools. The EFF government, which builds libraries in schools, will build libraries in schools that will be accessible to nearby communities in order to encourage culture of reading by 2026. The EFF government will blacklist all teachers who sleep with learners and their names will be made public. Can you see that? Can you see that? Well, my problem with that, I agree, by the way, that they should blacklist those teachers. But I think those teachers should suffer the criminal consequences for their conduct. It shouldn't end at that. But my only problem is that this comes from the EFF, because the EFF promotes the LGBTQI. Okay? And according to the LGBTQIA plus community, these are minor attracted persons. You see? Right now, America is busy with that and seeing that this idea originated from there, that the EFF is. Let me show you. The EFF talks about this here in this manifesto. We'll skip all of that. We'll get to where they talk about the LGBTQI. It's in this manifesto. Right there at the bottom. Social development. As I said, you can read some of the things because I just find that there's a lot of information here. The next one is what I'm talking about, LGBTQI. There you go. You see? Listen to what they say here. The EFF affirms and celebrates lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. Asexual are people who don't regard themselves as having sex, like as in, they are asexual. It's like saying, I'm Muse from Muse. You understand? I hope you do. Nevertheless, let's continue. The EFF affirms, celebrates these persons and all people of diverse sexual orientation. All people of diverse sexual orientation. The EFF also acknowledges the existence of other evolving acronyms. You see that? Well, that includes minor attracted persons. Because right now in America, they are saying pedophiles should not be called pedophiles. They should be called minor attracted persons. And the EFF is saying they affirm all people of diverse sexual orientation. The EFF also acknowledges the existence of other evolving acronyms and terms which people use to describe their gender, sexuality, and sex characteristics. Although there has been some progress on LGBTQI A plus equality in South Africa, there is much more to be done, as people in this group face a number of challenges in accessing their rights and are vulnerable to discrimination and hate-motivated violence. The intersection of gender, race, and social class makes people of these groups even more vulnerable to discrimination and hate motivated by violence, with black lesbian women being the most vulnerable to sexual violence, and more specifically to what is called corrective rape, which is a gruesome act of violence against lesbian and queers. LGBTQIA plus persons are often discriminated against in the labor market, in schools, hospitals, and churches, and they are at risk group for poor mental health. Okay? So all I'm simply saying, if the EFF embraces this lifestyle, they cannot dismiss that teacher who wants to sleep with children, because that teacher is a minor attracted person, and that teacher acronym is about to be added. That is why this is called LGBTQIA plus, because they are still evolving. That's all that I'm saying. I'm not denouncing anything. I'm not embracing anything. Perhaps the only thing I'm denouncing here is the hypocrisy of the EFF, to say they embrace LGBTQI, but they are speaking against a teacher who's sleeping with a child. If adults who sleep with children, whom we, sane people, call pedophiles, are right now being called by this LGBTQI group in America minor attracted persons, believe you me, that's coming to your country. Believe you me. I actually made a video on this very channel where I spoke about that. I observed that the video did not have quite a lot of views, comparatively speaking, but that's okay. But all I'm simply saying, that's coming over here. And it's hypocritical for people who embrace this, what you call alphabets, not to embrace the others that are up and coming. Okay? Okay, guys, that's it. That's almost 2 hours. That's 1 hour, 31 minutes. That's the EFF's manifesto. You can see they have taken a grocery list of all South Africa's needs, and they've put them, it's like you take people's needs and you put them in a question format. They've put them in a solution format. They took all the needs and say, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. That's how I know that they are lying. I know that they are lying because they promised to have 1 nurse per school. I know that they are lying because they promised to build libraries and laboratories that have got the necessary equipment, scientific equipment by 2026. I know that they are lying because they said they will have orthodontists per school. I know that they are electioneering, okay? And considering all of that and the fact that they want to turn our country into Cuba, Floyd Shivambu is in our parliament making that very assertion that they want to emulate Cuba. South Africa, in terms of its GDP, is doing much better than Cuba, okay? There is no way Cuba, therefore, is our example. I will make a separate video to talk about that. But it suffices for the purpose of this video to simply say they want to make our country a communist utopia. Most of us are not communists. The rights that we enjoy right now, you would not enjoy them in a communist state. You heard that they will take your land, you will own nothing, and they expect you to be happy. So for me, this is a political party that I would not vote for, even though there are certain things that I hear that I agree with, but I don't believe that they are genuine in saying that they would do them. I don't believe communists can ever tell the truth. Okay? For them, the truth is nothing but propaganda for the purposes of making the enemy to, let the sleeping dogs lie. Okay, look, that's my opinion. You tell me what you think down below. And by the way, if you are an EFF member, you can tell me why you believe the EFF will do these things without insulting me. Because if you do insult me, I'm just going to delete your comment. And it's a waste of a comment. It's a waste of typing. It's a waste of ink. It's a waste of your time and energy. But if you write there the reasons why you support EFF, then I will not delete your comment. I would let it be. In case you haven't noticed, people who comes to different videos and say Viva Msholozi Viva, though I don't agree with them, nevertheless I don't delete their comments. Why? Because they are not expletives. They're not using expletives. We need to be civilized. It is tiring for adults to behave like children. Now think deeply about what I'm telling you. Adults should not be permitted to behave like children publicly. Why? It's not cute. It's only cute. A childish behavior is only cute from a child. It's not cute when it's an adult doing it. Nevertheless, guys, let me love you and leave you. That was the longest video I've ever made, and I hope you have enjoyed it, because I've enjoyed making it. I find some of the things that the EFF is saying here completely hilarious, and I don't believe that they have an intention of doing any of the things that they have listed here. Okay, let me bow out. Ciao, ciao. Bye.